Hello everybody, it's the beginning of March. Got a little dusting of snow on the ground here up in the ridges of Pennsylvania on public land, and it's the second part to a short little series I want to do on hunting mountain bucks again in this area, about 3¼ mile in that direction. I harvested a Pope and Young class buck this archery season, and the first time that I was in here was in September of 2024, and it wasn't a spot that I was considering on hunting anytime soon. It was a spot that I thought I would just check out for future hunting purposes, but it turned out to look so good that I did a really quick scout, and I'll quote somebody that I look up to that's a legend in archery hunting, is someone who really I don't know if a lot of people know about him, but John Eberhart, I know, I try to watch as much as I can, but he calls it a speed tour, preseason speed tour. So I used his method, and I have to give him credit where credit's due because he's a legend, and I'm not even going to come close to that guy. He's got a lot of record book bucks, but he hunts a lot of public land, and a lot of what I learned from him, but then I applied it to my local area. He's from Michigan, I'm from Pennsylvania. Similar in terms of pressure, but different in terms of the ridges. We have these ridges, and it gets pretty rough in the ridges in terms of terrain. But, and I'm sure it's pretty rough in certain swamps of Michigan too, but in terms of the local area here, we have changes in elevation 1,000 feet plus. Down from where I live to 1,200 feet, up here to almost 3,000 feet, and the weather changes drastically on a regular basis, and deer are doing different things depending on what's going on with the weather. But I was in here last September, and there was an abundance of acorns, a bumper crop. I mean, literally you're walking on them cracking when you walk, and on top of that there's greenbrier that's at least waist high or higher in some spots, and it's behind me, you can see it. And greenbrier, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but greenbrier has a very high protein content, particularly in the summer when there's leaves on it. Right now there's no leaves on it. It still has some good protein available in it. And of course, deer need protein, bucks need protein for antler growth. So even if there's not a lot of acorns, there's greenbrier. And it helps you in many ways. One, obviously bedding areas. Two, feeding. So the deer just move in and all through it. There's trails that cross constantly. The key is you have to find the hubs. Now often these bucks in an area like I am will bed on higher ground because I've found the beds on higher points, and areas where the mountain has a bench, or there's a flat low area between 2 or 3 high spots, and you'll get bedding around that. And then especially during the rut, those bucks will just cross all through there. That's what happened to me last year on November 2nd. I saw half a dozen bucks, and one was bigger than the one I shot, and there were other ones that were younger, and there was all age classes, 1.5 through probably, I don't really know how old my buck is. I'd venture to say he's 4.5 plus. He might be 5 plus. I don't know. He's a big deer. That's what I go by, body size. He has good mass, not the biggest rack, but he's Pope and Young. He score out Pope and Young. So these high spots circle the lower lying area. There's greenbrier, there's acorns. It's perfect. So what I'm doing today is I'm circling the outside spots of where I saw these deer move in the fall, trying to figure out even better bedding spots, trying to figure out where I can intercept a buck earlier, before the rut, before they're always on their feet, when they're moving that first 15-20 minutes before dark, or the last just when it gets light, the first 20-30 minutes of light. If I can pick him off before he gets to the bed, maybe harvest a buck maybe earlier October, mid-October, maybe even early October. If I can just pick him off, and that's the key point that I want to make here is, if you find those areas in the ridges where you have a flat lower lying spot with, I'm not talking a great distance of elevation, maybe only 50 feet higher or 100 feet higher, where you have ridge lines surrounding that, And those deer like to funnel down into that. Okay, they come off those ridge tops and they're funneling down into that because there's feed. You got to find it where there's feed. There's a lot of oaks. There's greenbrier. Greenbrier is the key to my success lately. And of course, a lot of areas have a lot of cuts in the ridges on state property, and those edges that are high spots where they're bedding that filter down into lower lying flatter spots off those little peaks, those little high spots. So it's sort of like you're on the ridge, the hills are moving around, different benches. You come across the flat bench and draws coming up to it, and you have higher spots around it, and those deer will bed on it. They'll filter down into those lower spots, especially if there's feed like acorns and even more greenbrier. And they're social animals, so even though they could actually eat in their beds because there's greenbrier everywhere, they're going to go to these hubs. Now in those hubs, those lower lying areas that come off those higher spots that surround it, there often are a lot of scrapes, community scrapes. There are a lot of rubs, and you can find the buck movements by the heavy rubs coming out from where they're bedding. Like I found a spot last week in here where there's a cluster of new rubs, old rubs, all lined up, and in some places just all around within a 25-yard radius, 20-yard radius. It's just rubs, new, old, all together. Old trees rubbed over top with new rubs, and that tells me that a deer, bucks particularly, they're moving on that line to get towards that social area that's off of those tops, those high little ridges, those higher ridges around the lower area. They're moving towards it to socialize, to check does, and last year they were just moving from every direction. And if you could find that in an area like this, in the ridges, where you have sort of like a bowl shape, you're in the ridge, the big ridge, and then these ridges are so big that terrain features are within terrain features. So you have the lower lying area and like a bowl around it. It could be a half a bowl, it could be a full bowl. In this case, it's like 3/4 of a bowl. And then draws come off of it and going down into the lower lands. And they'll move up those draws. They'll move through that bowl. And then eventually they work up to the higher spots where they can hear better, see for longer distance down over, and they have the cover of the greenbrier. And they could smell. The wind comes up to it, especially we have temperatures warming up. It'll move up into the higher spots, and then they go down to the lower in the evening because the temperature's dropping, and then the cold air filters and air drops down into the lower, and they can smell. All these little different things you have to think about, but I use scent lock, so I don't really worry about the wind. I can't believe more people don't use it. If you use it the way, and I'll refer John Eberhard again, you can email him. He'll give you his whole scent lock regimen, his whole routine. He'll tell you exactly what you need to do, and it works. It works, guys. You gotta look Eberhard up. He's awesome. He's probably the best hunter I ever read, I ever watched, I ever learned from. So when you're out in the ridges, if you're someone that's in the ridges, consider what I'm saying. Look for those areas. It's sort of like a bowl or a half a bowl. Often deer are traveling through. They bed on those higher spots, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm circling the core area where I saw the most movement last year, and fringing out, trying to look for those bedding spots where I can catch deer coming into that core area before they get there. Between that core area of movement, that hub, that intersection and crossing of movement, putting up stands, and I'll put up cameras maybe. I don't know how many cameras I'll put up. Last year I had no cameras in here. I did everything based on sign. I had to prove to myself sometimes I feel like you can rely too much on cameras. So I'm circling that core area where all the deer movement was, trying to figure out where all the beds, marking bed spots on Onyx, and then finding the trails that are crossing through it, the heaviest trails. And then I plan on marking trees where I'm going to set up. Probably get a half a dozen spots where I'll set up and hunt the outside early on in the season, between the core area of movement where the rut action is and the bed spots. And then when the rut comes, and that travel area, that rutting area where they're constantly moving, I'll be set up there end of October, early November. So that's what I have to say today. I hope it's useful to people. Get outdoors, take a kid outdoors, preserve what we have, guys. Good luck in all you do, and plus on top of this, I'm looking for spring gobbler sign. Before you know it, spring gobbler will be here. It's March 2nd, so good luck, take care, and get outdoors.